And do we have any other members online? I thought I saw Mr. Bering.
Yes, we have Mr. Reeves and Mr. Bering online.
Good morning. So thank you all for being here this morning. It is 9:03 a.m. This is a meeting of the Zoning Ordinance Advisory Committee meeting. Ms. May we start with the roll call, please?
Yes. Chair Hampton, Vice Chair Blair, Ms. Bagley, Mr. Hall.
Here.
Mr. Bering, Mr. Reeves.
Good morning, I'm here.
Good morning. Ms. McGregor, not online yet. And Ms. Popkin, or Commissioner Popkin, is not online yet.
Thank you. So we have six members present. So we have a quorum. We have one agenda item and 2 minutes to approve. I'm going to ask us to take our items out of order and maybe start with our minutes today. Hopefully those are a little straightforward. On our July 18th minutes, we had held those over to review those. I will say I had an opportunity to go back through our notes. I had no recommendations for corrections to the minutes. So if there were any other discussion on that.
And it's been explained to me. So then we vote on the.
Good morning, and Commissioner Popkin has just joined us at 9:04 a.m. So is there a motion to approve the minutes as submitted? Thank you, Vice Chair Blair. Is there a second for Mr. Hall? Thank you. So that is a motion to approve the meeting minutes from July 18th, 2023. All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Minutes are adopted. And we have our second item, which are approval of the minutes from August 1st, 2023. And that was discussion items for our permeable surface to come back. Any comments to the minutes? Seeing none, is there a motion? Thank you, Ms. Bagley. Ms. Bagley. Thank you, Mr. Hall, for your second. Sorry, get my brain going this morning. So we have a motion by Ms. Bagley, second by Mr. Hall for approval of the meeting minutes from August 1st, 2023. All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Minutes are adopted. So with that, we will return to our one discussion item regarding off-street parking and loading requirements. Ms. May, if you wanted to read into the record, and I think you have an introduction for us as well.
Oh, yes. I'm actually going to let you read it in the record. Do you need any assistance with that? Okay. Well, I will pull up the minutes so I could read it more properly into the record. Not the minutes, but the agenda. But I did just want to start off that just want to introduce Michael Wade. He's our newest senior planner on our team, on the code amendments team. He comes to us from, he grew up in Garland. I forgot where he went to college. And then he wound up in St. Paul as a planner in St. Paul. And some big news with St. Paul is they don't have parking requirements, right? Yeah. And so he has a little bit of, work experience of that concept. So that's really exciting. And he's been working with us since April. And he's been getting up to speed on where we were, where we left off with ZOAC. And so I'm really excited about us kicking off and rebooting the discussion that we're about to have. And so I'll let him introduce himself more. Any places where I missed?
Sure. Nice to meet everyone. If I haven't met you already virtually or in person, sometimes I'll look at the screen to look at the virtual members, but I don't know where you are out there. I studied anthropology at the University of North Texas, anthropology and German studies, and then urban and regional planning at the University of Minnesota in Minneapolis, and got to work for the city of St. Paul before moving back to DFW. Tend to have a pretty soft voice, so if you need me to speak up, please let me know. And I'm happy to be back in DFW. I'm really proud of PUD and the work that all of the leadership and ZOAC and CPC are doing here in the council. So I'm more than just parking. Come shake my hand, but also I think that's what we're talking about today. Do you want to read it into the record?
Absolutely. Okay. So DCA 190002 is consideration of amending the off-street parking and loading requirements in chapters 51 and 51A of the Dallas Development Code. So with that, I'll hand it off.
I have a PowerPoint presentation. Let me share. Way. All right, so this is the off-street parking and loading code amendment. Lots and lots of work has been done on this already. We will touch a little bit on a lot. The plan today isn't to go very deeply into any one thing, but we do have a lot of ground to cover. So I may get talking fast just to get through, and I think we really are looking forward to the conversation after this. So today it's all about the reintroduction of the topic. We're going to look at it from a 30,000-foot view. And then we really are wanting to hear from the ZOAC what are there any concepts or data that's missing, that's confusing? Where can we cover more ground by the time we bring a staff report back? We'll look at the background of the study, what work has already been done. We'll look at what we know about parking and parking regulations and how they compare to our council adopted city plans. And then we'll look at a couple of scenarios, a reducing scenario, and then what we're calling a user-oriented or no minimum scenario. Finally, we will address some concerns, calling this FAQ very generically, but we just wanted to highlight some of the questions and opinions that we've heard already. And then we'll turn it over to the ZOAC for discussion. So parking minimums aren't new, but of course, kind of 2019, some cases became a little higher profile, made their way into the news and caught attention. Of course, these couple of cases only represent the many ZOAC, many variance, PD, SUP cases that we know of that deal with parking minimums. And so these images become familiar, but there are many cases that are behind this. And then honestly, many people who just come into the front counter realize that they don't have space or time or resources to work out the impacts of parking minimums on their project and turn around and go home. And we end up with homes that aren't built, businesses that aren't open. Councilmember Chad West initiated the study or requested the study in the end of 2019, and City Plan Commission initiated the study in October. So very quickly, and I'm going to go over things that a lot of us already know, we deal with daily or weekly or bi-weekly in our roles, but this is sort of just to have it in the record and to make sure that we're all on the same page. Land uses require a parking space, usually following a ratio. So it might be a ratio of a parking space to a square foot, might be a ratio of parking space to animal stalls for commercial stable. I believe it was the New York Times that reported on parking space per gallons of capacity for a sewage treatment facility. So these began in the Dallas City Code in 1947. They have been kind of tweaked and changed and morphed over time. Similar with off-street loading, although many fewer off-street loading spaces. A quick note on PDs. The scope of this study is Chapter 51 and 51A. Some planned developments refer to Chapter 51 or 51A for their parking regulations. And so when that happens, that PD will be impacted by the changes that we make. When a PD encodes its own custom parking regulation within the PD, that will not be impacted. And then some, like this one, this is an example from PD 24, which refers to Chapter 51 for part of it, but part of it, it also encodes its own. This will be impacted accordingly. So PDs are not holistically dealt with in this study. We're focusing on 51 and 51A. And then, of course, the code provides for exceptions for preserving trees, for providing parking for bicycles, successful appeals to BDA, and then historic buildings and our historic built form. Now, this is the good stuff that I hope we won't be disappointed. I'm going to show you and describe a little bit what ZOAC went over from 2019 to 2021. It was a lot of work performed by Lorianne and Andrea. Lorianne and Andrea are here, as well as Sarah, David Navarez. A lot of great staff put lots and lots of detailed work into looking at the topic. So we looked at current regulations, how are things now in the city code, the peer city review. We looked at other cities. We looked at, we did literature study, looked at cases, lots of public input, lots of interdepartmental input. Ended up, ZOAC started kind of floating a certain framework of reduced minimums, geographically specific, and we'll get to the outline of those. Looked at travel demand management plans to incentivize a reduction in single occupant vehicles traveled, and then design standards as well to make for a more pedestrian friendly and environmentally friendly parking situation. And the theme really was and still is quality over quantity. When we left off in the fall of 2021, we were just beginning to pursue the idea of testing the framework. And we left off and haven't looked at this for a couple of years now, just because of some major department change. It wasn't anyone in the ZOAC saying stop. It wasn't any city leaders saying we need to not pursue these. It was just leadership change, interdepartmental change, a shifting of priorities immediately, but we're happy to pick this up again right now. The 2021 framework, and we'll break this down a little bit, that we ended with: reduced parking minimums for low density residential zones, R, D, TH, and then a buffer around those. No minimums outside of those, and then exceptions for even some of the properties within that geography. Transportation demand management and design standards, which I mentioned. Some of the exceptions for that framework, the revised parking minimums, dealt with the age of the building, the historicity or cultural importance of the building, and then the size of it as well. Transportation demand management, this is something that we're carrying into today's consideration. It's intended to reduce single occupant vehicle trips. It will be required, the idea is that it's a program that would be required for larger development projects that are over a certain threshold. It might be a number of dwelling units, might be an amount of square footage. When a project comes, a development or redevelopment project comes to us, the city says you need to achieve a certain point target by picking from certain strategies. And those strategies are improving the pedestrian realm above the minimum requirements, subsidizing transit passes. There's a whole menu that staff have worked out, and they just need to, each of those strategies have a point target, and they just need to use the strategies, add them up to the point total that the project was given in the beginning. And then design standards. Generally, these come in two categories: urban form and then environmental. The point is to improve the pedestrian experience, make it an enjoyable, walkable city, and then to mitigate the environmental impact of parking lots. That is the intense contribution to the urban heat island effect, and also handle surface water runoff better than we do right now. And then I just like this quote from the Dallas Sidewalk Master Plan: in all multimodal trips, and that is for everything, cars, bikes, transit, anything, the user at some point is a pedestrian. And so these design standards can be very important in turning Dallas really into a walk-friendly city. Now, we left off in 2021 just before the Redbird Mall framework testing. The test happened. It was the company OmniPlan that did it. Since then, there wasn't a report that was written. There was no analysis. A lot of that was just deprioritized while other things took priority. But we do have some leftover documentation from that. And I think when we get to ZOAC feedback part of today, if there is more information, more analysis from this that you would like, feel free to let us know. In the end, there was a reduction from 1,700 spaces to about 1,500 spaces, not a huge impact. There were some environmental additions, there were some travel demand management and design additions, which are exciting. Still quite a bit of parking left at Redbird Mall under this theoretical testing. So let's look quickly at what we know about parking regulations, and then how our city council adopted plans interact with that and comment on that. I like themes. I have a lot of themes, a lot of principles that carry through. If you saw any of the listening sessions, it's very important that we keep top of mind that transportation and land use are one. They interact with each other. Our modes of transportation impact how we build our city, how we use our land, and how we use our land impacts our transportation. And so when we're thinking about parking, driving, building, we need to remember that parking is not only a byproduct of transportation, it's not only a byproduct of how we've built our city, it also contributes. It produces more driving, more vehicle miles driven. It produces a certain landform. And this is something that we see not just sort of from common sense. If you make something easy, more people will do it, but studies are showing this as well. Again, this is going to be a 30,000 foot view type of presentation, so I'm not going to linger on any particular detail part. Happy to come back to these, but we know that parking does cause more driving. Another guidepost: poorly designed parking, it's unsafe, it's unhealthy, and it's ugly. A lot of these things, I don't think there's a lot of disagreement on. We'll probably get to places where there is, but this intersection is one that really caught my eye. This is South Polk Street and Camp Wisdom Road, a beautiful residential neighborhood, very green. And there's a lot of great neighborhood businesses right there that are stranded in a sea of parking. It's no fun. If I lived in the closest home to any of these shops, I personally would get in my car and drive a couple of blocks just for safety, stay out of the heat. There are other choices that we can make about how we build our city. And those choices are guided by city plans. The council has adopted most of what you see on the screen. The Dallas Bike Plan update is still in draft form. Our on-street parking and curb management policy, we're really excited about that. That's in final draft form, and I think they're accepting public comment until the August 25th, August 27th. That's the Department of Transportation. And so we'll be bringing that up several times. Of course, Forward Dallas, the land use update with our place type maps is also moving forward. I just want to dive into a couple of these plans in particular that comment on automobiles, an auto-dependent city. This is our comprehensive environmental and climate action plan, which says very explicitly to reduce vehicle miles. Dallas County fails to meet federal air quality standards for ground level ozone. This is a direct result of internal combustion engines, especially gasoline and diesel burning engines. Air quality will therefore worsen as temperature rises if overall vehicle miles continue to increase. We acknowledge this as a city. Solutions are aimed at shifting the dominant commuting mode away from single occupancy gasoline-powered vehicles. These actions have high potential to reduce overall emissions, reduce rush hour congestion, and improve air quality. Improving access to jobs through changes to land use and transit-oriented development reduces the need to commute long distance and enhances quality of life. These are the solutions that the council has adopted. This is giving us our direction. Connect Dallas. This is our strategic mobility plan. This is the transportation plan for the city of Dallas. It's not paired with another more auto-oriented plan. This is the overarching transportation plan. Growth over the past several decades has strained the city's existing transportation network to its breaking point, resulting in increasing congestion, longer travel times, and safety risks for all involved. Connect Dallas represents a major shift from the auto-centric traditional model to a multimodal strategic model of planning. The transportation vision in this plan promotes compact growth and transit-oriented development, and emphasizes more development around transit stops and on vacant or underutilized land in already developed areas. In general, there would be a greater intensity and mix of land uses. This is the direction that the City Council has adopted for us. The mandate from here, reduce vehicle mode share. It mentions compact growth and transit-oriented development, a greater intensity and mix of land uses. It's very important for me to mention that TOD is not just glass towers in a park with a rail sliding by and everyone carrying lattes as they walk happily to work or to their home. TOD also looks like Live Oak and Skillman, for instance. Duplexes, triplexes, townhomes next to some neighborhood commercial. DART found that was sufficient to have 2 high-frequency bus routes. That's TOD. Tyler and 12th off of Jefferson. 4 bus routes. That's, in my opinion, much more connected than just one light rail sliding through your neighborhood. Quickly touching on DART's 2045 plan. This isn't a city plan, but just making the point that when we achieve densities that are simply at a duplex, a triplex level, DART looks at that as far as where they spend their money and where they spend their resources. And so if we are hesitant to start taking baby steps away from auto dependency until a bus or a train comes through our neighborhood, we might be waiting for a while until land use catches up against the system. One affects the other and the other affects the one. Connect Dallas also talks about using vacant or underutilized land in already developed areas. We've seen pictures of parking lots. We live in Dallas. We know what those look like. I don't want to linger on this. In the top right, we have a sketch by our very own Ryan Baring, an architect, and we've seen sketches like this pop up here and there that just show, hey, if you tweak your regulations a bit, we can allow a different type of housing, an extra housing unit. We've got space to do this. This is also an economic development issue. We're told in our ED policy to reduce vehicle trips. Smart growth and development foster walkable and accessible communities that are attractive to live, work, and play. This could lead to stronger communities, an increase in property value, tourism, and firm recruitment and retention, while at the same time conserving energy and reducing commuter costs. By concentrating on building more livable communities, Dallas will be able to reduce its reliance on the already congested highways and take advantage of city living at best. We need to, in order to achieve this, we need to decrease reliance on single-rider automobile trips by 30%. It also goes into decreasing greenhouse gas emissions, creating walkable communities, fostering the creation of homegrown business at the neighborhood level, increasing transportation mobility aligned with land use direction, fostering walkable communities with zoning, land use design, etc. So this is an economic development issue as well. Generally speaking, these other plans speak to this. Again, 30,000 foot view. In the world of housing, we need more units. We hear about that every day. And I think it was just yesterday I heard a report from the Wall Street Journal saying that homelessness is up 11% in 1 year. That's record breaking. And the top 2 reasons are a shortage of housing and a shortage of affordable housing. Land use, all of this needs to be coordinated. Sidewalks, they prioritize high use areas. That is, if you're in an area where you're already walking, your area will be prioritized for investment, for more walkable infrastructure. Same with biking. Curb management, again, we'll bring that up periodically through this project because this really is the other half of looking at parking in Dallas. This is what's happening on the street in front of my house, at the area just nearby. And then this isn't a city plan issue, but I do want to bring up, again, the economic and financial considerations when we're looking at parking lots versus more walking and transit-oriented design. So there are companies that analyze city and county tax revenue. I think one has done this for Dallas. I haven't been able to get a hold of any real data or real report, and so I'm going to use an example from Minnesota. Ramsey County is the county where St. Paul, Minnesota is. St. Paul is the capital of Minnesota. Just a couple of quick examples. In the top left, that's Maplewood Mall. That produces overall a certain number of million for the property. But when you look at it per acre and ask, are we really using our land wisely? That produces $1.3 million per acre. Whereas in the bottom right, you've got an example of a very classic Main Street built form. It's called West Mall Victoria Crossing. This produces $9.8 million per acre. And the money that goes, that comes from that goes back into sidewalks, goes into school districts, et cetera. And so with the built form in the bottom right, West Mall Victoria Crossing, just 9 acres of that produces the same amount of tax revenue as 68 acres of Maplewood Mall. And if you look at Maplewood Mall, I don't have a top-down shot. The property is mostly parking. One more example in the top left, that's a 4-unit apartment building. Very humble. I walked by that to work while I was in grad school. That 4-unit building with a little bit of parking behind it and street parking produces $3.2 million per acre. There's a picture of Home Depot down in the bottom right. If you can't see it, it looks like any Home Depot that you've ever been to, mostly parking with the Home Depot in the distance. May as well be a mirage. That produces about $600,000 per acre. And so it takes 2.5 of the 4-unit apartment buildings in the top left to generate the entire tax revenue that the 12.5-acre Home Depot does. So again, these are just examples of walking-oriented design, transit-oriented design versus parking-oriented design. So there are a couple of scenarios. We're calling this just reduced versus user-oriented. The reduced scenario is what we talked about by the end of 2021. This is the framework that was being floated where many parking minimums were eliminated except for an R, D, and TH districts, plus a 330-foot buffer around them. And then, as a reminder, there were exceptions based on the size, age, or importance of buildings as well. This is just, we just labeled it the reduced scenario for conversational sake. The user-oriented scenario, this is a no minimum scenario. This is one where the user, the property owner, the developer, the homeowner gets to choose and follow the market in how much parking they want to provide. So a quick comparison with the 2021 framework, we expect a pretty low and short-term impact. That is, there are some malls with seas of parking lots. There are Targets, et cetera, that are really built for peak and actually overbuilt even for peak design. Those will see change. Those will see improvement. Those are opportunities for housing. And we expect that those will sort of see more immediate attention from developers, and then things will stop. It's a limited geography, of course, and staff will need to continually revisit this as the city continues on its growth trajectory that we're on. This channels the benefits to areas kind of already supporting multimodal mobility, so it doesn't necessarily get us very far in the direction. It does get us some way in the direction that we want to go, and continues to bifurcate the city into a more urban and more auto-dependent zones without good, solid, resilient, transitional types of neighborhoods. The user-oriented or no minimum scenario, this is going to be very slow. Any impact of removing minimums will be very slow, but it will be consistent and will be a long-term step. This disperses the impact sustainably, gently, organically. It will follow cultural preferences, built form preferences. Developers will be reading what people need and want, and we'll talk a little bit about the pressures on them in just a moment. And then we have our Department of Transportation curb management policy offering the right and most appropriate tools to manage right-of-way challenges along the curb. So again, calling this the FAQ, but really we just wanted to address some of the greatest hits concerns that we've heard that are very important. One theme, we're all in this together. We have good options ahead of us. We have our direction in council adopted city plan, and all we're doing today and in this project is figuring out the best way to get there right now. We're growing. We know we're growing. We do hear that we don't want to be New York City. We're not New York City, and I agree. We're really not trying to be New York City. With the right moves right now, we can be better than New York City. We are better, we can stay better, and we can plan for the future. So if this, let's see, the website is Move Buddha. It's a moving website. I don't know if they're really the masters of statistics in the world of urban planning, but somehow they're projecting 2100. DFW could be the largest metro. The point is taken. We're growing. We see it. So what about me? I need to drive to carry kids around, or I need to drive because I have mobility impairments that prevent me from using other forms of transportation. How am I supported? Reforms like this allow those who can get off the road to choose other transportations, and those who need the road to drive on a less congested right-of-way and to have a better driving experience. So anecdotally, I biked here today because I can. I didn't have to deal with children. Sarah had to deal with children today. And there's a transportation mode for everybody, but I could get out of Sarah's way by using my bicycle. ADA requirements are in the building code and our state code, so those with mobility issues are still provided for under state law. Resulting change from this amendment will be slow. I'm going to say this again. It's going to get repetitive, but it's very true, and it's important to remember that. Most of us will likely not see any impact to our driving environment. What about me? If I want to use other transportation options, my life is based around driving for the foreseeable future. We're not proposing maximums. There are other steps that we could be taking that go much farther than simply proposing a no minimum situation, which ends up kind of being the moderate situation. And so your usual destinations will still provide as much parking as they want to. Parking lots aren't going to change overnight. This is going to be slow and really on a scale of generations. This is something that we're doing for our children, for our grandchildren. It's really just wedging open the faucet a little bit and starting drop by drop of change. This will give us time to adjust if and when we individually, per household, per neighborhood, see fit. And then again, the curb management policy, I would recommend everyone here to look into that. I can give you the URL. They are accepting comment on that policy. This is really, really important and was not being established or worked on previously from 2019, 2020. I think this just began in 2021. And so this is really the new kid on the block. It's a very important policy, and it targets the right of way, it targets the curb and how we manage that as a growing city. What about me? I live on a low density block right next to a popular commercial corridor where parking minimums act as a barrier to growth along that corridor and limits vehicles parked along the curb in front of my house. The staff is of the opinion the appropriateness of land uses can be targeted with land use regulation and amendments. We're the Code of Development team, we're the Urban Planning Department. We love this stuff. We're very excited to help with land use regulations to target land use issues. The curb management policy is really the right policy, offers the right tools to manage curbside parking and maintain a quality public right-of-way for everyone as mixed-use neighborhoods like this see housing and economic maturity according to adopted city plans. So there are quite a few of us who live in single-family homes or on single-family blocks, but we can bike to a grocery store, walk to a coffee shop, etc. We can access through another mode of transportation some of our life's needs. This is really a mixed-use neighborhood, and our expectations of that should be according to that. We're not New York City, and I like it this way. That's fantastic. I didn't move back to New York City. I moved to DFW. We're evolving at the beat of our own drum, truly. The goal is not for us to be carbon copies of other cities. It's to create the safest, healthiest, most sustainable, beautiful, equitable, and prosperous Dallas for ourselves and for our children. This will be a disaster. Developers will build with no parking at all. My quiet block will be overrun with strangers' cars. Developers face immense pressure from lenders, and this is something we hear from developers almost with quaking in their voices as they say it to us because of the pressure that they receive to build parking. They can't get funding without it. Commercial tenants demand it, residential tenants demand it. Getting the government's one-size-fits-all regulations that are really kind of best guesses out of the way frees up businesses and residents to decide what's right for them per each unique situation. And then, once again, the curb management policy is designed to strategically and pointedly handle outlier situations where spillover parking onto public curb space truly constitutes a public problem. I like to remember this. So, we did have a couple of listening sessions. We opened it up with a poll, just with 3 questions. First, who was attending? How do you identify? It was mostly residents at both listening sessions. What transportation mode do you prefer? And this is a really important circle graph. I never thought that a simple circle would make me happy. It's partly because these are happy colors, and that's fantastic. But also we see about a third or 2/5 love the private car, and that's their preferred transportation. About 2/3, 3/5 prefer other modes, and this is exactly the mix that our city plans envision. We're not taking away cars, not taking away roads. Again, we're not imposing maximums. We're not taking away parking spaces. All we're saying is that we can provide options we can diversify our transportation citywide by starting now with, again, just drop by drop of change. This will make change generations down the line. What are you interested in by joining the conversation? Change. Are my community's needs met? What is staff understanding? Someone wanted to talk about ADUs. I hope they weren't disappointed. Economic impacts, reduced parking rules, learning what's changing, housing in general, public transportation. And some feedback that we got from verbal comments and from the chat. Let's remove minimums altogether. This will be a disaster. We should implement maximums. This might work for downtown, but not my neighborhood. Finally coming into the 21st century. I want or need to drive, and this will make my life harder. And then we had one developer speak up, say that he needs to provide parking again, quaking in his voice, and then careful with the transportation demand management plan and what magnitude of project that applies to. Just want to be sensitive to smaller redevelopment projects. So today, what we're hoping for from ZOAC, this is kind of a taking the temperature meeting. We know that there was a lot of work done from 2019 to 2021. We want to know, do you want more information from that that's not available in the reports? And again, we have revamped our project website. All of the meetings are posted on there, the videos, the staff reports. And so we suggest at least perusing that and seeing if that contains some of the detail that you're interested in. If you really think that summarizing some data or information will be important as we move forward, staff is happy to do that. We're going to be refining the TDM, especially with developer and Department of Transportation input, complete the red line staff report, circulate for interdepartmental review, especially the Office of Equity and Inclusion, continued engagement. Now, this won't necessarily look like additional listening sessions, but we have already been invited to neighborhood groups, that kind of a thing, special interest groups, just to honestly say exactly what we've already said today. Where were we? Where are we today? Where are we going? And then we hope to bring this back to ZOAC this fall. Again, that depends sort of on what our conversation looks like. If you guys say, Michael and Sarah, this is wonderful, be blessed and go forward, then things will go faster. If there's more nuance in a ZOAC recommendation, then this could take a little bit longer. We have heard from a couple of members of the public, you guys studied this for 2 years, and then it's been 2 years since then. Let's get going. Let's make some change. CPC, hopefully in the fall, form a CPC recommendation to City Council. And then we would love to have this to Council by the end of 2023, maybe early 2024 if possible. The City of Austin is moving at light speed, and also we just want to win. But that's not the most important thing. Of course, having the right code amendment for Dallas is very important. So I think we'll turn it over to the ZOAC. A couple of questions for consideration. You're not bound to these, of course. What concerns should we address when we do bring a staff report and code amendments and a staff recommendation back to ZOAC? What do you want more data on that will be relevant to this? And I think I do want to turn it over to Sarah for just a moment, see if she has any additions or how we'd like to talk about it today.
No, I'm fine. I'll hand it back to the chair.
Thank you. And thank you, Mr. Wade, for the presentation. I was able to listen to one of the recordings, so appreciated having some of that recap in here for members who may not be able to attend those listening sessions. I do want to start by acknowledging that Mr. McGregor joined us at 9:13 this morning. We also have 3 plan commissioners present. Commissioner Rubin, Commissioner Young, and Commissioner Carpenter are with us today. Thank you all for joining us for our discussion. We do have registered speakers. Since I anticipate we're going to have a pretty robust discussion, I want to suggest we go ahead and take our speakers, and that way we can move into discussion. And I think we had some speakers online. Is that correct? And I know we've got some folks here with us in the chamber. And so do we want to start with those in the chamber while we get online teed up? So I know we have folks here. Is there anyone who would like to speak to ZOAC? And I will ask everyone to start with their name, and if you could please limit your remarks to 3 minutes. Can you make sure your mic is on? We're having a little bit of trouble, so they may not.
There we go. To speak in 3 minutes on the subject of parking is impossible for me, so I will narrow my focus this morning to one particular aspect of the problem before you that doesn't get a lot of attention and you may not be aware of. And I want you to envision a retail shopping center in community retail zoning in an auto-oriented semi-suburban area of Dallas, maybe Preston Forest, or in my district, Lakewood Village at Mockingbird and Abrams, or perhaps at Hampton in Illinois. Primarily auto-oriented with limited public transportation. What you don't realize necessarily is that when we develop Chapter 51A, the limitation, the functional limitation on retail density in CR is not the FAR limit. The FAR limit is 0.75 to 1, which is not achievable without structured parking. And in many of the shopping areas that I'm describing, structured parking is not economically feasible. And so what functionally constrains the FAR is the parking requirement, the surface parking that must be provided. So even though if you look in the code, the parking requirement is 0.75, if you look at the second page of my handout, for a typical one-story retail development, the parking functionally limits the FAR to about 0.44. Now, what happens as you reduce that parking ratio? And let me say at the outset, I fully support reducing retail parking ratios in Dallas. They are too high, they result in too much concrete, and they need to be thoughtfully reduced. But as you begin intuitively to say, all right, this parking over here is no longer needed, the question arises, okay, so what shall that space be used for? Under the current code, it can be used for more retail. Perhaps a highly auto-oriented retail, such as a drive-through of some kind. And you see on that example, as we reduce the ratio to 1 to 250, we open up some more retail space, perhaps a pad site. If we go further and reduce it to 1 to 300, we perhaps have 2 pad sites. If we reduce it all the way to 1 to 375, we have potentially 3 pad sites or some other form of retail in that space. Retail, of course, is a very high traffic generator. And so what you've done overnight by changing only the parking section of the development code is you have functionally increased the density for community retail zone. I didn't do a similar analysis for regional retail zoning, but from looking at it, it seems that you would have the same problem there. Of course, retail regional zoning tends to be larger and perhaps a little more upscale and might support structured parking. But CR is primarily where you have this problem arising. I won't go through the other examples, but there are examples for 1.5 story and 2 story. The takeaway, okay, the takeaway is you could increase density from 33 to 45%.
Thank you for being with us. Do any of our other folks that wish to address the members? Yes. No, actually, can you hit it again? Members online, are you able to hear our speaker?
Sorry, I have allergies, so
Yes.
I'm hoarse. My name is Cookie Peden. I reside at 7111 Debbie Drive in far north Dallas. And I am concerned that if we try to paint a stroke that is one size fits all, even with the density you have in downtown Dallas, it's going to cause problems. I'd like to cite one example. I taught at the Technical University of Munich, which is about 18 miles northeast of the central campus. So I had to go buy light fixtures for my apartment. 225 pounds of light fixtures to transport by public transit is not feasible. So I had to take a car, and there's limited parking in downtown Munich because their density is the highest of any of the cities in Germany. So I had to hire a person to come out and hold a parking space, and it took me about 45 minutes to clear a parking space to pick up those light fixtures. That's the worst nightmare that could occur. So one size does not fit all. Next door to the light fixture company was a stationery store. That's no problem transporting by public transit. So I would urge that as you look at the different things you're looking at right now, one size does not fit all. Depending on what type of retail you have, you could have a store where it's physically impossible for somebody to carry that load back on mass transit. So downtown Dallas density is pretty high. Your zip code in downtown Dallas, you have 12,703 people. My zip code in far north Dallas, it has 5,300 people. So that's a very mile-wide thing. The density in Munich that I mentioned, you have 4,890 people living within each 0.6 square mile area of Munich. We don't have that density in Dallas. So when you look at driving and riding mass transit, when I was working on Silver Line for DART and how it was going to pass through North Dallas, I tried to take the train. It now, 8 years later, is 1.6 miles to the nearest bus stop so that I could then take a bus, make 3 transfers to get to the Arapahoe station and come downtown to participate in a DART board meeting. So those things are things that I would urge you very carefully to look at. One size does not fit all. If you live in Outer Mongolia like I do, or you live in the southern sector, you really have a totally different situation when it comes to parking and shopping. So I would urge you just to be very, very cautious. I laud the fact that Michael was saying this is something that will take multiple generations to achieve. I agree, because what's built out in North Dallas is sprawling, auto-dependent transportation anywhere you want to go. So please look at your density and help DART out by focusing on the high-density areas when you look at mass transit and walkability. I can't walk 1.6 miles in 106-degree temperature, guys.
Thank you for being with us, and thank you for your service. Good morning, Ms. Hiramoto.
Good morning, Jennifer Hiramoto, 10465 St. Clair Avenue. Thank you so much for bringing this topic back. We worked so hard on this a couple of years ago. You talked about all the resources that we have and our new plans that the city have adopted. I would like to direct you to the April meeting that had the interdepartmental testimony, including DART, that talked about the other interests that the city has that will benefit from reducing parking. My other point is I would like to ask that maybe staff completely rethink the design standards. As they were written in 2021, they were extremely problematic, particularly for infill development. I'm not sure they're necessary, and that's my suggestion. Thank you.
Thank you for being with us today. Did we have any other speakers in person? All right, hearing none. Speakers online.
Would you like to start with Mr. Barrett?
Yes.
Okay. Mr. Barrett.
Good morning, Mr. Barrett.
Hello, Nathaniel Barrett, 4526 Rieger Avenue here in Dallas. Very excited for the return of parking reform here. I do urge you to drop the parking requirements across the city because, as the staff presentation was indicating, the curb management Curb management policy is the right tool to regulate the problem of spillover parking. Yeah, people.
Mr. Barrett, you froze if you're able to hear us. We can no longer hear you. We'll come back to Mr. Barrett. We have another of our speakers online.
Is Galen Bellamy there?
Hi, I'm here. Can you guys hear me?
We can't see you yet. You might toggle your camera on and off.
Okay, let me get that for you. All right.
We can still hear you.
It's coming in.
No,
All right.
we can see you now. Please
Hi,
begin with
thanks.
your name and address. You have 3
Yes,
minutes.
this is Galen Bellamy. Address is 2200 North Haskell Avenue. I wanted to address you guys today because I'm the steward of a property that's got, I believe, some historical significance. There's a old church in East Dallas known as the Moon Mansion to some people who are, familiar with, Dallas cultural history. But this basically started out as a piece of property that was it was a church for the African American community of East Dallas back in the early 1900s. So this property actually predates the driving era of this city. And so I just wanted to give you guys some context from from the perspective of somebody who owns one of these historical properties and the challenges that parking has kind of given us. So we've owned this property for over 50 years, and it's a building, it's a beautiful piece of property, but maintaining it is very expensive, and the parking minimums have just made it to where you basically are trying to find ways to generate income with the property by looking through the parking codes to see what is allowed. And just, since it's actually a Central Dallas piece of property, there's not parking available around where you could use it as probably its intended purposes, such as a event center or anything like that. So basically, wanting to give some context and say, for historical properties at least, I believe that something that existed before cars should have at least precedence to be used as a business again, because by not having that option, even my family members, after my father passed away and I became the steward of this property, extended family says, hey, you should sell this to a developer. But, I'm a huge proponent of keeping the historical significant properties in this city, because when they're all gone, you just can't get them back. And I don't think that people realize how amazing it is to have these culturally significant places. And as a person who who owns one, is like, we're not a wealthy family. We literally are we scrape by just to keep a roof on the place. But if we were able to open it up to be used as an event center or a restaurant or any kind of economic business other than just renting out a few rooms, we could really turn it into a cultural center. And I feel like a lot of the old churches, I've seen them all, be sent to the wrecking ball in East Dallas. So it's like, it's such a shame. And I'm not going to let that happen to this one, but this building's probably 120 years old coming on this year. It was built in 1904. So I just really wanted to kind of urge you guys to give that deep thought to historical properties in Dallas, because if you look at it, there just aren't that many left. They're being torn down so that the one next door can have, if you want to have a restaurant, you tear down the historical building adjacent to it so that you have enough parking for it. And I feel like that philosophy is antiquated and doesn't allow for culture to be part of the equation. So I just wanted to kind of
Thank you, Mr.
request.
Bellamy.
Thank you.
That's your time. Thank you.
And I think we're still waiting on Mr. Barrett return. How about Chase Beakley? Not online. Laurel Stone? Is she online?
Yes, I'm here. Let me turn my video on.
We can hear you. Yes, and we can see you now.
Yeah.
Please begin name and address. You have
Okay.
3 minutes.
My name is Laurel Stone. I reside at 4315 San Gabriel Drive. I'm an architect and consultant to multifamily developers, so I'm just here to speak in support of the reductions. I think they're widely needed. I have seen multiple mixed use and multifamily properties face challenges related to these minimums that are not needed. I think that the developers are always going to provide parking that is demanded by the market, as stated in the presentation. I also think there needs to be consideration given to existing PDs. Over 1,000 PDs exist in this city. Many of them were created to address parking reductions, as the PD was the main tool for doing that. And without these affecting those, they're still going to be faced with going through Board of Adjustments or parking amendments, or sorry, PD amendments. I also think there needs to be consideration for multifamily to allow tandem parking, packed parking, and mechanical parking. I've seen many cities that leave that to the developer to decide if those are feasible and viable on their property. So I think that those should be considered as well in the study. Thank you.
Thank you for being with us today, Ms. Stone. Ms. May, is Mr. Barrett back online?
I don't see Mr. Barrett at the moment. Do you think we can maybe go to the other commissioners that are online? Maybe they want to.
Well, I was going to open it for a discussion for our members.
Oh, okay.
If that, did any of the other commissioners wish to make any comments? I'm seeing shaking heads, so thank you all for being here to listen to the discussion. So with that, we're going to open it up to members. I think, as we all heard, this will be coming back to us. So if I could ask everybody to maybe start with 5 minutes so that we can make sure we get around to everybody and allow staff time to answer our questions and give them some good direction. We're right at 10 o'clock. I'm going to say I will have to leave at 11:15. So we'll certainly hand it off to Vice Chair Blair if we need to, but if possible, it'd be great if we're able to wrap up our discussion this morning. So with that, who would like to kick us off? I see Mr. Baring. He got his hand up first, followed by Commissioner Popkin.
Thank you. I've got some notes, so I'll try to keep myself on track and keep it high level here. Couple comments, couple questions. Pretty astonishing that we don't meet federal air quality standards. Curious how that's measured. And that's just more of a comment than a question, I suppose, but that was pretty alarming. Secondly, I understand it's city budget season. I'm curious if, I know I'm aware of consultants that do like tax value analysis on land for cities. And I did a little bit of that myself. I'm curious if, is our current development pattern and density balancing our budget? Or, I mean, what's the thought there as far as tying this into budget season? And then I just want to affirm that we have to consider all the tools holistically. I understand our purview is just off-street parking, but the TDM and that whole conversation is very critical to what we're doing. I think trust is huge with the development community. It seems to be broken in some ways. There's kind of this straw man evil developer, and I just want to take 1 minute and speak to some personal experience. I am involved in designing 3 projects for which is being utilized the MIHDB Mixed Income Housing Development Bonus Program, which requires a half of a parking space per residential unit. So real quickly, 3 projects, one of which under that program would be required 21 parking spaces. Base code would require 44 parking spaces. The developer is providing 41 parking spaces. So 90 to 95% of the parking is being provided. Project 2, similar numbers, 21 would be required or are required under that program. 42 would otherwise be required and 39 are being provided. Project 3, 16 would be required under that program, 35 under base code, and 31 are being required. So, look, we're in Dallas. People recognize, what the market's going to demand. I will tell you from an architectural perspective, what that allows is for much better buildings, much more flexibility in the site plan. with parking not in such visible areas. So it allows the parking not to dictate the architecture. It shouldn't drive the design of our city. And that's what, under this small sample size of a program, it has allowed, is for parking not to dictate the design of the city. I think those are my main points. I will say I recall a comment from Miss May when several years ago we looked at this about the amount of zoning reviewer time spent on parking. And I can speak to this personally as well. We've had a project recently go through permit review, and everything except for zoning had been approved, and zoning took an additional 6 weeks, part of that being due to parking requirements. So there's a bottleneck here in our review process, and that's parking. So I appreciate the time. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Baring. Mr. Bobke.
I just really want to thank staff for all of their hard work on this, and also ZOAC members. This has been a long road, and I'm so excited that we're finally nearing the end of it. And as far as continuing work and questions, I echo Mr. Baring's concerns that this is a multi-prong approach that really takes a lot of pieces working in coordination to pull off over the long term. I'm excited that we've got the urban design standards, the TDM. Those are two really critical components that I'm excited to see included in this. What really concerns me now is that we really need our micromobility aspect to be beefed up. We've seen DART redo their system, and I work a lot in Uptown. We've recently been looking at scooter parking, where I was made aware that the city does not want to encourage scooter parking on sidewalks because we don't want to encourage people to scooter on sidewalks. Where else do you scooter in Uptown? There are no bike lanes, no micromobility lanes. You're basically asking someone to be in the street. You're not allowed to ride scooters on the trails. Like, where would you recommend that a 12-year-old get on their bicycle and use any mode of transportation other than their parents driving them? We're really creating a poor situation for ourselves. I'm really concerned that the City of Dallas proposed budget for next year is decreasing our funding for bike lanes. I believe we had 2.5 million last year, and the proposed is 1.6 million. That's literally like a single mile of a bike lane per year. Like, this is really abominable. Also, we've got our bond program going on right now. I haven't dug into the details, but as far as I know, there's no significant contribution to micromobility lanes in the bond program. We've got a new bike plan coming out, and we all know the tragedy of bike lanes to nowhere. If we're putting a mile in here and a mile in there, we're not going to have a significant impact in people's ability to get around our city in other ways other than driving if we're not significantly impacting all of the options to give people ways of getting around our city other than driving. So I'm really excited, in short, that we're headed in the right direction, and I'm very concerned that we're missing a critical component of this. And we've got, a small window here to really talk to our elected and appointed officials to try to sway the opinion of this urgent funding opportunity in both next year's budget and the bond program to really make a critical dent in how this parking scenario can play out for our city over the next 10 years, next 15 years, next generation. But other than that, I also wanted to mention, Ryan mentioned, our air quality issue. I also worked for the COG and their Try Parking It program, which is a really great app, if no one's ever used it, to reward people who are not driving cars. But even they have, it's been an uphill battle to get people to sign up for the Try Parking It app and really use it. And I feel strongly that there are some critical components missing that enable people to take other forms of transportation, including micromobility, which we can have buses and trains, but often it's that last mile that connects you to your destination that is really the critical connector that is missing, and allowing folks to walk, bike, scooter, skateboard. There are so many new technologies coming on board. I can't wait for the day when we have people riding golf carts around our city and four-wheelers. Like, I don't know where we're headed in the future, but I think there's some really cool technologies coming on board, and we really need to be prepared for that. And I'm so excited. This parking component is a huge piece of that. I would like to hear from in the future. I know Mr. Navarez in transportation has been working on this transportation demand model and talking with developers in the zoning process about implementing some of these ideas. Maybe I missed that conversation with him, but I would love to hear, kind of a summary of his experience and how the development community has been taking his recommendations, and I guess maybe feel a little more comfortable that that component of lowering parking minimums would help provide some of the solutions that are going to help make this really work well. But I'm excited to see this direction we're going. Thanks.
Thank you, Commissioner Popkin. So I think I heard one request is to hear from David Navarez and to understand the traffic demand modeling or management? Modeling.
Management.
Management. Tried. All right. Other members. Ms. Bagley and then Vice Chair Blair. Oh, Vice Chair Blair and then Ms.
I'm going to try to be succinct and quick. I'm going to talk about 3 areas: ADA, DART, and urban corridor. I'm happy that Michael, I'm sorry, I got the last name. I got the first name, not the last. Wade. I was going to say Wood. Ken Wade. That you will be considering ADA needs when it comes down to parking. As an ADA, there is never enough ADA parking anywhere that I go. Never. We must be considerate of those that must use their cars in order to get from point A to point B and have parking enough established so that their in-mobility issues can be considered. Then I'd like to talk about DART, or lack thereof. I live in a district, one of the largest districts there is in the whole entire city. I manage over 55 square miles of the city of Dallas. I have 1 DART rail. I think that if you're going to consider parking, it must be considered in conjunction with DART and the availability of micro-mobility. For my area, that's laughable. I apologize, but it is. We don't even get scooters. So even if we wanted to rent a scooter, you don't see them. They're not available. They're not even, it appears as though they're not even allowed. I have, like I said, I have 1 DART rail trail, 1 DART, and it only has 2 stops in the whole entire city, and the whole entire district. Those 2 stops are right at Camp Wisdom and the police station at the Singing Hills Rec Center, and the last one is at UNTD. Yes, we are building, and yes, the design standards I would like to employ would be a high density walkability, because I only have 1 DART rail station, and that's where I can get all the density that I need. If you're anywhere else in my district, you must have a car. You must have several cars. I got 3. I drive 2 at a time. um, One, and they all, well, yeah, I got 3, I drive 2. I have to have working automobiles. DART, when they did their redesign, they didn't redesign to include me, they redesigned to exclude me. What DART rail trails what DART lines that we had, they removed. I had a DART that bus line that went straight down my neighborhood, it was removed. I had a DART line that got kids to school, it was removed. So I had, and in my most eastern section, DART won't even come. So when DART says that you can call and get them to do their vans, you can call them today, schedule them to come tomorrow. They show up 3 or 4 days later, if at all. So, and I have the largest urban corridor, I would say, in the whole entire district. My entire Kleberg-Wiley area is all urban. They ride horses. On any given day, you can find 50 horses on the street. I have a picture. I'll even share it with you so you can add it to your what we need to design for. I don't want in that corridor, I don't want I don't want walking trails. I want riding trails. I have a horse park. They're trying to figure out how to get the horses from the south side of 20 to the north side of 20 to the horse park. Give me that. And every one of those that work, and some of them are city employees, they live in the country, they have cows, they have horses, they have sheep, they have cars. Oh, okay, I gotta go. They have cars that they drive to work, several. And so in the end, I have 3 areas. ADA must be considered. Areas that don't have DART has to be considered. And the urban corridor that does not want to be changed to a non-urban corridor. They want to stay rural. They love their rural existence, and they don't want to be changed.
Thank you, Vice Chair Blair. Ms. Bagley?
I'm delighted to see the coordination between zoning and transportation. We tend to have so long worked in parallel spheres, parallel sphere, but it's really important that we get a holistic overall approach to this, and I think that's what I'm seeing. I live 10 minutes from downtown if 30 is moving, but I don't have a bus line within a mile of my house, and they've reduced some of the stuff. If I want to ride the bus downtown, I have to walk over a mile uphill either way. So it's challenging, and I think besides the ADA addressing our older population as well, different modes of transportation, not just for kids and young people, but for older people too, because you're getting a lot more of us as we come along. But I think there's just great opportunity to continue to move forward with this. I am cautious about just saying no parking requirements. I realize that's going to take a long time. But also we need to think about parking surfaces, and I'm very concerned about parking surfaces. I live actually on a Haybaker lot, and I have a gravel driveway. I don't know if that's legal or not, but it's been there a lot longer than most of the codes in the city. So And the big thing that I come back to that I talked about so long that we do need to think about, not just sidewalks in the congested areas, but if we're going to be a walkable city, we need to be able to walk, not on a goat trail, not on a broken up sidewalk. So I've talked about that for a long time. So you still got to, you're going to do all this, it's got to be a holistic approach. And I think it got off to a good start.
Thank you, Ms. Bagley. Mr. Hall?
Yeah, I want to thank the staff for an excellent presentation, Mr. Wade. Very thoughtful, very well put together. A lot of good information there. I appreciated that. I'd like to focus on the time frame. I thought it was interesting. You talked about we may not live to see some of the benefits. I got into an argument, well, a near argument with my wife yesterday while walking around North Park about this initiative. And she's like, I got to be able to drive my car. And I said, I said, we have to start making changes today, for the future. And I think she finally got it, but I think she'll appreciate this presentation today. I think there's a lot of, because of that, I think there's a lot of public misunderstanding about this. And one thing I frequently hear when I talk to people about it is, I won't be able to park anywhere I go. And I think we need to make sure we get the word out that, look, one, this is a long-term thing, but two, you're still going to be able to park. There just may not be as many parking spaces in some locations, like the Super Target over at Skillman and Abrams, that you've grown accustomed to. We live in a very walkable neighborhood. We live in a condo a mile from Preston Center and a mile from North Park. We can walk to the post office, to Walgreens, to El Phoenix, to Subway, to Rex's Seafood, to the dry cleaners. We can do a lot of that stuff, which I really appreciate. One thing we cannot do, though, is take a bus to North Park. I'm not even sure we can take a bus to Preston Center. And although we do walk that, we have to cross Northwest Highway more than once to be able to do stuff like that. And it gets to be very hectic unless you're out very, very early on a Sunday morning. So anyhow, I think these are all things that need to be considered. I like what I see so far, and looking forward to get moving on this.
Thank you, Mr. Hall. Stand by, Commissioner Popman. We're going to make sure we close out first round. Wanted to go back. So, Ms. Bagley, I think I heard two things: parking surfaces and potentially sidewalk standards. And then, Mr. Hall, I think you were talking about, I don't know if street crossings is the right way, but essentially, how do we strengthen connections, and whether that's within our design standards or if that's going to be part of a different part of our code. And I'll let staff speak to that, but are those two kind of high-level takeaways? Okay, just trying to make sure I capture comments as we go forward. So, Mr. McGregor, Mr. Reeves, we're trying to close out first round. Oh, Mr. McGregor and then Mr. Reeves.
There we go. Thank you, Madam Chair. Yeah, I'd like to thank Mr. Wade and staff for the presentation and staff for the years of work that have gone into this. In the time that I've been involved in this parking reform, I think what strikes me the most is the misconceptions that people have about the simple term eliminating minimums or eliminating mandates, the same thing. So I just want to touch base in very general terms over some of the misconceptions that I've heard. And I think this is the right place to try to bring a little bit of clarity to this. The first one is that eliminating mandates does not equate eliminating parking. If somebody wants to go to the store to buy appliances or lights for your apartment, you will have parking. You will be able to drive to the store and pick them up. The only thing that eliminating mandates in effect does is it shifts the decision of how much parking to create from City Hall to the market. And the reason why that makes a lot of sense is that every single case is different. Every single multifamily product is different than the other. One might be close to a bus stop. Another one might not be anywhere close to the bus stop. So the best person to make the decision on every particular product is the person right there on the ground. The one size fits all is what we have right now, which is a book written very far away from Dallas that comes up with made up numbers, not based in empirical data at all whatsoever. And that's our parking code. Even people that are in the organization that put that book together today agree that that is simply not a good tool anymore. So, all right, so limiting mandates does not eliminate parking. Second, it's not an experiment. And I don't think it was covered in today's presentation. If it was, it must have been covered before I came here. But over the last 5 years, dozens of cities in the US have eliminated mandates in some way or another. This is something that is recognized across the country as just the right policy and the way to go. It's also not an idealistic principle. I have heard someone say that a bunch of white college kids came up with this, parking reform thing, and they're just behind it. That's not it at all. I mean, there's science and papers written about this. It has been for what, 40 years or so, and it's all part of this. You would know better, Commissioner, but it's part of this changing of minds of how you design your cities. And finally, it's not immediate. It's been said already, but if we eliminate parking minimums today, none of us will see any difference at all whatsoever for a while. All we're going to see is that some developments will come up quicker. It'll probably benefit smaller businesses that don't have to meet those big requirements, and slowly the city will become more walkable. I'm wearing a T-shirt, by the way. I just want to say it was a gift, and it's a quote that I really like. It says, "It's hard to find parking in great spaces." So cities that have ample parking and free-flowing traffic are usually ugly cities because they're designed around the car. It's a nice, elegant way of saying, hey, let's change that. One thing that was not mentioned in today's presentation as well is that the issue of equity. We know for a fact that parking mandates disproportionately hurt lower income communities, not only because they have an impact in driving housing costs up, but also because they promote auto-centric communities where, think of places where a family has to have 3 cars because mom, dad, and the oldest daughter all have to go to work, and the only way for them to get to work is by car. And the expense, the cost to a family of owning 3 cars, the insurance, the gas, all that is, and so beginning to move away from this autocentrism should have, over time, a meaningful impact in equity and helping those communities. The last comment I'd like to make, and it's a request for staff, is I am aware that larger developers have said something like this. They said, I don't really care about minimums. They don't affect us. Our problem is that we don't have maximums. And the reason it was stated earlier, lenders themselves have based and have this sort of paradigm idea of what parking should be, and they will not deviate from that. And the result of that is that I use as an example, I go to the grocery stores in Uptown, to Tom Thumb or to Whole Foods, and this is, by the way, not a criticism on those companies. This is the point about parking. I have never been to either of those 2 stores where the parking that's provided for retail, and these are stores that are in buildings that have offices and apartments, where the parking lot is at least 2/3 empty all the time, any day of the week, any time of the day. And the answer is really simple. Of course, we know they're using the code that they're required to have, and that the lenders require them to have. But if I stand at a Tom Thumb, right where the elevator bank is, the elevator bank that takes you down to the parking lot, I'm the only person taking down the elevator. I'm almost done that. I'm the only one taking the elevator down. Everybody else is walking out the front door, walking to their apartment or to their office with the groceries. So we should at least consider minimums, or let us know. I'd like to see at least a broad stroke of what those might look like. Thank you. I'm sorry for going over my time.
And you said minimums. Did you mean maximums?
Of course I meant maximums. Thank you. I was thinking that minimums could be converted to maximums, maybe, but thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. McGregor. So parking maximums question. Thank you. Mr. Reeves.
Thank you. I think I have about 3 points and a couple of requests from staff here. So first of all, I definitely am of the mindset that we need to reduce parking all the way around. I think the elephant in the room is community retail. And that clouds my mind. I think that clouds a lot of people's mind. And so when it comes to single family, multifamily, townhome, whatnot, getting rid of parking minimums to do better architecture and to make more affordable housing, that starts making that starts making sense to me. So I might ask that maybe we take community retail and we set it aside in a different chair, and we look at some of this other stuff, and we look at that separately, so we don't potentially throw the baby out with the bathwater here. So so that would be one request. The second request would be, I think Commissioner Young has a really good point about the elephant in the room, community retail. Because I'm hearing we want to reduce traffic, we want to reduce trips, but he makes a really good point that if I'm getting rid of parking spaces and I add another high occupancy retail site to that pad, whether it's 1 pad or 2 pads or 3 pads, I'm actually inadvertently increasing traffic. And I think that's a very valid point. And I think that's something I would like to challenge staff with, like, okay, so what are some out of the box solutions for that? At one point, we talked about potential landscape additions, but the development community didn't want to do that. And I remember some people arguing against that, but is that completely off the table? If we're going to give you all of this extra space so you don't have to park it, then what are you going to give back? The second out of the box thing I would think is, if I'm giving up a half an acre of parking because I don't need it, and instead of, and this is community retail, can we then could it then be zoned or mandated that it's zoned residential? So that if we're getting rid of this parking and we're talking about affordability, that when we do get rid of this parking, this pad, that we actually put residential in that space and not another high use car transit, a car centric use there. So what out of the box things that we can, what can we do out of the box? Thinking out of the box there potentially to get a win-win. My third thing for staff would be, I'm reading the curb management policy on the city's website, and it says that they're seeking public comments on the draft on on-street parking and curb management policy between now and Friday, August 25th, 2023. So I think that has a lot to do, again, community retail and spillover. I don't see necessarily grocery stores spilling over into neighborhoods. I don't see office space spilling over into neighborhoods. Again, it's the elephant in the room that does. So one of their statements on the website, it says discourage parking spillover into single family neighborhoods. And then I was reading the PowerPoint presentation. I didn't see that addressed, other than, oh yeah, we can do resident only parking. So it's like we end up putting the burden on the people that are in the residents rather than somebody else. So I would like to see staff come back with, what is this curb management policy? What changes are made? What do they recommend? And I know that we discussed like a neighborhood doing a parking district or something like that. But again, we're throwing the work of that on the neighborhood. And that's a lot of ask and a lot of involvement. So again, what can we do to think out of the box? I'd like to see the curb management policy briefed and what significant changes are going to be. And that's still open to the end of this month. So I don't know when that's going to come. I'd like to see what happened to the potential landscape additions. If we're going to remove parking space, can we put the curb back further from the street? Walk down Walnut Hill just east of Central on that sidewalk. I dare you. It's horrific. So if we're going to remove parking, can we move the sidewalk 15 feet in? Require people to do that. So anyway, those are my points. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Reeves. And I think that's first round. I will say most of my questions got answered. I just want to compliment Mr. Wade on his presentation. It was very helpful. I did get to listen to the recording, and I was delighted to see Skillman and Live Oak because I've ridden both number 9 and the number 3 bus lines. So with that, we will go to, I will say I support Ms. Bagley as well and all the others who talked about how we need better sidewalks and better connectivity to actually make some of the things we're talking about work, and we look forward to hearing those. Before we go to second round, so I had the notes from Mr. Reeves to pick up curb management briefing, considerations of, I'm going to put this broadly, how do we go back with, if we do maximum, or excuse me, not maximums, as we reduce parking, how do we look at what goes back in that parking with our delivered housing landscape requirements? Has that been evaluated? Is that a fair summary? I heard specifically landscape requirements. Could housing, I'll let our city attorneys weigh in on that, but
Yes.
what that might look like.
Yes.
Okay. So Commissioner Carpenter, if you wanted to share some thoughts, we're going to go to second round, but we will ask 5 minutes, please.
It won't take 5 minutes. Just to follow up on, or to elaborate on what Mr. Reeves just said. Yes, I was going to ask that we get briefed on whatever the specific tools and strategies are under curb management, traffic demand management to deal with spillover. I did read the entire curb management document, whatever it was, 90-something pages, and sent in comments, but I didn't get enough detail there as to how, what really exists to help with that. So I would like to hear more about that. The other thing, tying in with these discussions of community retail and additional, pad sites that might be created, we're seeing more and more cases at CPC, and I'm sure there are cases that we don't see, they're just being done by right, where the evolution in these pad sites seems to be for businesses that are drive-through only. So I think we need to kind of stand back and see, what are we trying to prevent here? Do we want the cars just to not come and park, or are we trying to keep cars, or from people having to rely on an automobile to use that particular business or service? Do we want to look at, do we want to encourage these businesses to have, interior places to sit or exterior places to sit or walk-up windows? Because I think that's a component here that, if we are going to increase the density through, eliminating parking spaces and adding potential additional businesses, what are the complications if we're getting more and more drive-through only businesses? Thanks.
Thank you, Commissioner Carpenter. I'm going to open it up for second round because I think we're trying to make sure we give staff direction on what we want to see come back. Commissioner Popkin.
I wanted to follow up on this community retail land use because something in Mr. Wade's presentation really struck me that I keep thinking, can that closest neighbor walk to the shopping center? And I remember as a young teenager, I often walked, a few blocks down the street to the icy shop in the middle of the parking lot at my neighborhood Albertsons. And those are some of my fondest memories. While my parents worked 2 jobs, we 3 teenagers were home alone with no way to get around town. And I think that's the case for a lot of kids these days. So yeah, what are those setbacks like? How do we encourage not only new shopping centers being developed, but the redevelopment of older shopping centers to have more permeability for adjacent neighborhoods? Oh, and I had one more thing. Oh, yes, I did want to reiterate, I believe we're getting information about permeability for parking lots for our other agenda item. We've been discussing permeability in general, so I'm looking forward to that conversation as it ties in here too as well. Thanks.
And I think I may just, staff, is that clear? Because I will say on the permeability item, it has been specific to front yard setbacks. So that may or may not be captured. Is that something that we need to include, or is that included in the design standards that staff's going to bring forward to us?
So, with the other case that Lori Levy's working on, the impermeable surfaces, since we knew that we were also having a separate case for off-street parking requirements, we didn't want to try to mix the 2 conversations together. So Lori's is more focused on the residential districts and how much impervious surface is allowed in the front yard setback. But, you know, with our off-street parking code amendment that we're talking about right now, there is some room for us to consider what kind of impervious or what the appropriate standard for impervious surfaces are in non-residential districts. So we're certainly going to consider that in, you know, upcoming meetings and present some ideas.
Thank you. So I think we've got design standards. Oh. Ms. Levy's making a clarification for our members online.
I believe what Ms. Levy is referencing is in the August 13th, 2021 Urban Design Standards meeting where we discussed that the permeability was included as an urban design standard in this conversation. So yes, it is included in there, and I'd like some more clarification on what that means. Thank you.
So that will be coming forward. Now, when to say, so I think we've got really three elements. We've got parking materials, we've got permeability, and I missed one that came out of the landscape standard setbacks and how those all go together. So as we're looking at those design standards, making sure we've got all of those holistically. I saw another hand. Oh, and one more from Commissioner Poppy. You are not over time.
Could we add tree canopy to that? I think that's an important part of this
I
conversation
think
as
that's
well.
probably landscape provisions.
Landscape provisions, thank you.
Yep, thank you for the clarification. Mr. Baring?
Yes, thank you.
We
Wanted to echo,
can't, there you go.
Oh, can you hear me? Okay.
We can now, yes.
Okay, wanted to echo Mr. Reeves' comments about just that it's critical we see the transportation demand management piece. And within that, I think learning more about parking benefit districts. I understand there's at least one that's been very successful down in Houston on Washington Avenue. I believe it's generated $300,000 or $400,000 a year for the residents in the spillover parking areas, as I understand it. So again, functioning like a public improvement district that could benefit in terms of safety and lighting, things like that. That's something I'd like to learn more about within the other tools available to us. Secondly, I think another tool, this is regardless of minimums or no minimums. I think understanding how we might be able to streamline the shared parking agreement process, making that easier and perhaps incentivizing it, as we have in many of our PDs, incentives to create mixed-use developments. I wonder if there's a way that we can look across neighboring parcels and encourage shared parking agreements by perhaps a reduction, depending on what those complementary uses might be, and then just streamlining the process for that. So perhaps we could be given some more information on that. And I'm just running through my notes here. I believe that's it for now. Thank you.
And Mr. Baring, for my notes, the second item that you mentioned in Houston, was that a parking benefit district? I didn't get all the words right. That I did get it right. Okay.
That's correct. That's correct.
Okay. Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay. So I see that we, Commissioner Kingston, I wanted to recognize, has also joined us this morning. Commissioner Kingston, did you have any comments? I think we're wrapping up, but certainly we've had some of the other commissioners speak if you wanted to share thoughts. We can't hear you. All right. we will look forward to receiving your comments, and I'm sure that you will write those and share those with us. So we're on second round, members. All right, I'm seeing none. I'm going to say, oh, Mr. Bering.
I apologize.
2.5.
I apologize. I just had one anecdote related to Mr. Reeves' comment and several of the others. With the kind of decline of big box retail, I think it's a huge issue that perhaps outside of the scope of this item, we can come up with an incentive to infill those overparked lots with residential development. For several years, 12 years ago now, I traveled around the country working for a national retail client that was buying up former Kmart stores. And just smaller towns generally, right? 30 to 50,000 people, but these 100,000-foot boxes just sitting vacant for years on end. And, we're seeing the adaptive reuse of those structures, but I think there's a lot more we can do to see residential in particular added and creating incentives there. So that's outside of this scope, but that's only going to be a growing trend, I think, as obviously so much retail has moved online. And those are huge eyesores in our city as well. So thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Bering. So I'm going to make two comments. I was going back through my notes, and Mr. Wade, I believe you mentioned this, that the last study by ZOAC had investigated, I'm going to call them economic development corridors, but there was a discussion about targeting those corridors, targeting development in those areas. And I think it ties in somewhat what I've heard some of the discussion is, as we're looking at reducing minimums, where are we trying to incentivize the types of developments we want to see coming back, focused around transit, focused around housing, focused around some of our other policy goals. So if that could be whatever information we have as staff is looking at that, I think that would be helpful for me. I think I also heard you mention that in the economic development policy, that it was a 30% reduction was the target, and you went through all the various metrics. But again, as we're reducing vehicle miles, as we're reducing single vehicle trips, is there a metric of what we're trying to encourage in its place? I know housing is one of the things that we've identified as a need within our city, but do we have any other tools that we can incorporate similar to the landscape discussion and some of the items that we've touched on that would be helpful for me to understand? I did also want to mention, I appreciate Mr. Bering reminding us about big box retails. For those who don't know, I am an architect by training. My firm was involved in doing the case study at the earlier one. I had no involvement with that. I don't actually even know what it says. So I'll look forward to hearing more about that when it comes back to us. But glad to know that that was made available to staff. So do we need to do a summary, or Ms. May, did you want to read back, or Mr. Wade, the information you have to make sure that we've got everything coming back to us, and let us know, do we think that this will be a second briefing, or how do you all see this moving forward as it comes back to ZOAC?
I think we'll probably circle up on the staff side, probably first PUD, and then maybe also some of our other kind of like first tier partners. The whole city works together as an organism, but and then we'll see if it's another sort of briefing, come back and present some ideas and some answers maybe that way, or if we're ready for an actual written staff report at that second moment. But at this point, I'm not quite sure. I wanted to circle back with the other partners in our department, see what they want, the next steps on the staff side.
All right. So any final questions from members? All right, do you want to run through your list so we can kind of check off and make sure we've got everything?
I would say, like, on the questions about the curb management policy, I don't think we would do it justice coming from the Planning and Urban Design Department. So I think I might just reach out to those staff members or Michael will, and maybe our return might be more, they get to do their own, summary of their plans and, on their programming and how they are explaining things like that. So
Yeah.
I think we'll try to coordinate, see if we can get them to join us for a meeting.
Okay. Yeah.
As a side note, there is a public meeting this evening
Oh, great.
listed on the
anyone
curb
who's-
management page.
Yeah. If anyone's available to attend, there is a public meeting tonight on the curb management. And might I ask staff, I'm sorry to put one on you, could you circulate the link to that for some of us so that we don't have to go search it out? Thank you.
And then I don't know if you wanted a summary of information to bring back to
If you would please, thank
We'll
you.
see. We'll see if I can read my own handwriting here. And this is also, this is going to be in no particular order, so choose your own adventure. It sounded like, Chair Hampton, at the very end of your comments, you're interested in more info on the Redbird Mall testing. Oh,
I think you mentioned we had it, so just that it was available. If there was anything that would influence as we're looking at either design standards or any of the other elements.
okay.
So so would it be okay with the body if we just found that study and were able to just email it? And then y'all can look at it in your own time and.
Yeah, it's online, isn't it? Isn't it part of the link on the website? Exactly.
I don't know that we have it online. Also, there's not a written study. There's not a narrative or report that accompanies it. So there are a lot of visuals and some bullet points describing it.
Okay. If you just
So-
wanted to email that out
okay.
to everyone, we can take a look at it. This is helpful.
Sounds good. Sure. And so this is probably going to be kind of back to front. How are we thinking about metrics for what we're replacing vehicle miles traveled with? Are we looking at certain thresholds of housing, that kind of a thing? Looking at or investigating commercial corridors. How are we thinking about the economic development impact? Actually, quite a few of these are just, we want to know more about curb management. So I think bringing the Department of Transportation team in will be very important in addition to some of the public meetings. Look at shared parking. How can we encourage or incentivize that program insofar as it relates to whatever parking reform scenario we're looking at? Continue to dig into ADA with mobility needs. Coordinate with DART. Make sure that as we're going forward, there are areas of the city that DART does not cover. How are we thinking about that? Generally speaking, design standards sound valued insofar as their environmental and walkability impacts, pedestrian sphere impacts. Continue to think about the parking surface, the literal pavement or whatever it might be in its place. Sidewalk standards, do those interplay with this code amendment? Street crossings. So as pertains to off-street parking, how does the pedestrian sphere look and feel? Look into maximums. How will that affect developers' pro formas? If we want to make larger steps forward, how does that impact lenders' pressure on developers? Excuse me as I flip my page. Look at community retail, the microscope, make sure that we're addressing that and consider out of the box options to address spillover, be very detailed about how curb management interplays with off-street parking. What are we replacing? Look into what we're replacing some of the parking with. So if we're a reduced situation or a no minimum situation, we suddenly have parking pads. How can we manage conscientiously what goes there? Spell out the design standards in general, including impervious surface, front yard setbacks. How are we making this a good environmental and walkable area? Tree canopy as well, landscape materials. And bring Mr. Navarez back, the guest star of the show very often. Want to hear about his conversations with developers, especially around TDM, but just what his experience has been working with them on parking and loading. Happy to write down anything else.
Anybody have anything additional? That seemed to match my notes. All right, we will look forward to having this come back. Ms. May? Yep. So Ms. May as advisors are two online speakers, and Mr. Barrett was able to re-log on, and Mr. Blakely, I believe.
Yeah, Beakley is here.
Mr. Barrett, are you able to hear us?
Yes, I am.
You had, get my button on. You had 2 minutes left if you wanted to share any final thoughts as we're wrapping up.
No problem. Yes, no, I was I was saying that's the right way to deal with parking is to address spillover issues through parking permits, no parking zones, and parking meters with those funds invested back in the neighborhood. I'd also like to comment that parking shouldn't be used as a pretext for other policy goals, such as trying to limit traffic or number of bars and restaurants, or to incentivize affordable housing. We should regulate and achieve those goals directly through better tools suited for that. The downsides of the mandatory off-street parking minimums are very, very high, and to include those as a tool for those other goals creates very high cost for the city. So I'd also like to urge caution on the design standards. The best thing we can do is to get rid of parking requirements. If we go too far on design standards and TDM and risk that goal, we will have accomplished nothing. So that's all of my comments. Thanks.
Thank you, Mr. Baring. Chase, I will apologize. I don't see your last name, but we do see you. If you wanted to start with your name and address, you have 3 minutes.
Sure thing. My last name is Beakley, and I live downtown on Main Street in District 1. And I wanted to add some thoughts in my experience as a small business owner and the impact that parking minimums have on small business owners. So I've a new tenant in a historic building near Baylor Medical Center. The building was built in 1921 and has a special historic use for Dallas. It used to house a cafe that Bonnie Parker worked at before she met Clyde Barrow, but it's been vacant or hasn't been used since 2006. While we were signing the lease, our real estate brokers, our landlords, and the contractors that we hired to do work on the building were all unable to tell us what the parking minimums or zoning uses for the buildings would be, which made it super hard for us to plan how we could use the space and whether or not our business would work there. Essentially required us to jump without looking out below. Then we spent a lot of money on architects and zoning consultants, around $40,000, to help us plan and figure those things out. Ultimately, for our space, if we wanted to pursue restaurant use, we'd have to have 46 parking spots, which is absurd, would require us to build a 2-level parking spot or a 2-level parking garage. And when we looked up ways to help us fit and find ways to satisfy our parking minimums, we found that adding bike racks, if we added 6 bike racks, we could only get relief of 1 parking spot, which I think is absurd and, implies that 6 people travel in every car. So I just wanted to highlight that I think parking minimums restrict our growth in a couple of ways. One, it creates barriers to restoring and using historic buildings that were laid out in a more dense area, may not have had parking set aside for it. And I think that's a shame. If we want to maintain and uphold the character of Dallas and historic sites like the building that we're using, we need to remove parking minimums. Two, it raises costs and timelines, which are money for small business owners to help navigate the parking minimums, zoning, and health code violations that all businesses have to uphold. If you're taking a lot of time to figure out how to satisfy your parking minimums, you're not able to start your business and you're losing money. It disadvantages or disincentivizes mixed use buildings. So we're trying to pursue a combination restaurant and retail space, which complicates our parking minimum structure a whole lot and essentially leaves it to where the city's parking minimums are dictating the layout of our building. How much we can use for restaurant space, how much we can use for
Mr.
retail
Beakley,
space.
that's your time. Did you want to wrap up your
Okay.
comments?
Yes, one last thing I'd like to add is I'm extremely fortunate, and I think all of the restraints that I just mentioned disproportionately impact working class entrepreneurs and people less fortunate than me. And I think that's something to consider as we reduce our parking minimums.
Thank you, sir. Thank you for being with us.
Uh-huh.
So those were our last speakers. I think we have our summary for staff. We will look forward to our upcoming briefings and having curb management and Mr. Navarro back with us, as well as updates from staff on the items we discussed today. With that, that includes our one discussion item on our agenda for today. We've already taken care of our meeting minutes. So with that, it is 10:59 a.m. We have a motion to adjourn. Thank you, Mr. McGregor. Is there a second? Second from Vice Chair Blair. We are adjourned, 10:59 a.m. Thank you all. Have a good morning. Look forward to continuing the conversation.
Thanks, everybody.